Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'd like to provide a few facts to back up what the Speaker and the Chairman had to say. But before I do, let me note that after me, Representative Ken Ivory from Utah will be making some remarks. Ken is a longstanding member of ALEC. He is a longstanding supporter of federalism and fiscal responsibility, and I look forward to hearing his remarks. Let me start with a few facts. 3 very important actions took place in 1913 that had a profound effect on our country. Number 1, the adoption of the income tax and the direct election of senators by constitutional amendment. And secondly, the establishment of the Federal Reserve. These 3 actions served to fuel the growth of the federal government, undercut states' rights, and enable the federal government to manipulate interest rates and self-deal in its own debt. As a result, today, the federal government is 10 times bigger as a percentage of the economy than it was in 1912, and still growing. Congress controls less than 30% of the annual direct spending budget, down from 97% in 1912. In addition, Congress controls 0 of the $1.5 trillion in tax expenditures, and therefore, in total, when you add up both direct and indirect spending, Congress controls 10% of expenditures every year. What kind of budget is that? Congress has only passed annual appropriations bills by the beginning of the fiscal year 4 times in my lifetime. That is an F-. Federal debt to GDP has reached record levels and is still increasing. Total liabilities and unfunded promises of the federal government exceed $125 trillion, which is 5 times GDP and about $380,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States, and growing. Believe it or not, interest is our fastest growing federal expense, for which we get nothing. And in less than 10 years, the Social Security and Medicare hospital insurance funds will be exhausted. And yet the leading presidential candidates for both major parties are saying, I won't touch Social Security and Medicare. Let me be clear, this is unacceptable and an example of laggardship rather than leadership, because doing nothing on Social Security means you cut benefits across the board 20% and rising in less than 10 years. I'm assuming that nobody here believes that the federal government's in good financial condition. So it's time to recognize reality. The federal government has grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, and undercut states' rights under the Constitution. Clearly, we are on a fiscally irresponsible and unsustainable path. In fact, every major federal fiscal and monetary agency has said that for several years, and yet nothing has been done. Failure to act is not an option because it's a direct threat to our future economic prosperity, national security, international standing, and domestic tranquility. The bad news will flow down to states and to us, we the people, if we don't act. Unfortunately, the debt ceiling has failed to constrain the growth of government and limit mounting debt burdens. Therefore, the only answer is a constitutional amendment that can constrain both current and future Congresses. Statutory approaches won't work. As I testified before the House Budget Committee earlier this year, 3 steps are necessary to defuse our ticking federal debt bomb. First, stop the bleeding. Cut spending for fiscal 2024 from the bloated levels of 2022 and 2023. Believe it or not, federal spending was 40% higher last year than pre-COVID levels. 40% increase in 4 years. Second, stabilize the patient. Create a statutory fiscal sustainability or debt commission that will educate and engage the American people on the facts, the truth, the tough choices, solicit input, and then make a package of recommendations for an up or down vote in Congress. As we heard from the Speaker and from the Chairman, there are bipartisan bills, and in fact, as of this very moment, there's a hearing occurring before the House Budget Committee where the sponsors of these bills are testifying, and I look forward to seeing those bills move forward. Third, cure the disease, adopt a federal fiscal sustainability constitutional amendment that would limit the growth of government and cap debt to GDP at reasonable and sustainable levels, absent extraordinary circumstances. This third point is where you come in. Shockingly, in 1979, 39 states had active applications for a convention of states to propose a fiscal responsibility amendment, and Congress did nothing. Importantly, 30 of these 39 were limited to fiscal responsibility only, thereby providing a critical safeguard against a so-called runaway convention, which is the primary objection that people raise to a convention of states. Despite this fact, Congress has failed to act, and as a result, this is both unacceptable and unconstitutional. The Federal Fiscal Sustainability Foundation, of which I'm a board member, has financed the drafting of a declaratory judgment filing by a prominent DC firm with significant Supreme Court experience. Several states are considering whether to file the case against the Congress to right this wrong. This case would have to be decided by the Supreme Court, which is conservative, and this is our best chance to right this wrong, is to get a case before the Supreme Court to force the Congress to discharge its constitutional responsibilities. We need more states to join this effort. Thank you. If you want to learn more about this effort and what you can do to protect your state's interest and to help save our future, please attend the breakout session at 9:15 at Trailblazers D and E. In closing, let me remind you two things from history. When George Washington made his farewell address, he issued 4 warnings. They were avoid excessive debt, avoid foreign wars, avoid regionalism, and avoid factionalism. How we doing? Second, Rome arguably was the greatest superpower in history. It was a republic for about 500 years, and then it fell and became an autocracy for another 500 years. Rome fell for several reasons. They included fiscal irresponsibility, political instability, moral decline, an overextended military, and inability to control its borders. Do those sound familiar? We must learn from history and others and take the necessary steps to create a better future. We, the people, are responsible and accountable for what does or does not happen in Washington. In the final analysis, we have 3 choices: to accept the status quo, to quit, or to fight. I choose to fight, and I hope you join me. Thank you, and I hope to see you in the breakout session. Ken Ivory, Representative Kim Ivory.